Hey everyone, this is Katie Torson from Open Doors for Lanark Children and Youth, and today I want to talk to you about grief. Grief on its own is already such a complex and difficult topic, and it's made even more complex and difficult by the fact that we are all going through something right now that is really unprecedented. So before I jump into this topic, I want to be mindful of the fact that some people watching this have experienced loss in the sense of death and losing loved ones. And of course, I will be talking about that, and I will be talking about other experiences of grief and loss that are really unique to this situation. I just wanted to put a timestamp here so that if you feel like me specifically talking about death and loss of loved ones is going to be a little bit difficult for you or not so easy to sit through, you can jump ahead to the part where I will not be talking about that so much in depth. Grief as it pertains to death and the loss of a loved one is something that is incredibly tough to deal with. And it's also something that we have awareness of as being a part of life and something that we will have to experience. And part of how we as humans have figured out how to manage some of those really tough feelings that come from that loss are in the traditions we have formed around it. So funerals, for example, gathering together and celebrating somebody's life. Right now, that's very different because we can't get together in the same ways. And in a lot of cases, many of the people who care for someone and who want to honor their life and who want to be around others who knew them are being stripped of that experience and that opportunity. And that's so difficult. And there's also a lack of closure happening for a lot of people, not having been able to see the person who they've lost prior to their death, or maybe having had plans to see them that were altered because of this and then losing them. On top of that, of course, there's the uncertainty, right? Something that I've seen a lot of is people not knowing what to write in an obituary, what to share. Do I write one obituary now? Not indicating necessarily when or how we're getting together, but then down the road, I write a second one. How do I deal with that? Totally different things than we are used to considering and used to thinking about. Of course, when you lose a loved one, they were obviously somebody who was entwined in your life, and there are parts of them all around you. Losing them means that you are losing this piece of life that you knew. You're losing a way of being that you knew, and you have to figure out how to adapt and how to move forward with that. Right now, that grief and loss is being felt in some other ways. There is a loss of a way of being. There's a loss of places and things. Right now, we are moving in and out of grief states because we're essentially in this space of constantly discovering the things that we lost. An event was canceled that you were meant to be part of. Or maybe you found out that something that isn't happening until a couple months from now has been postponed. All the time, we are having these waves of grief crashing over us as we begin to recognize, oh, there are a lot of different things that are going to change from this. And there are a lot of different things that I am going to lose in some capacity or another. Death is obviously something that is so difficult, and it also has clarity and a single point. There is death that occurs, and we go from there and we process from there. With this living loss we're experiencing, we don't know necessarily when the end point is. We don't know when even the turning point is right now. And as we start to think more and more, my life is different right now. How do I adapt right now? And the scarier, bigger question of how do I adapt to the uncertain future, to the things that might be different, to the things that might change? How do we cope with any form of grief and loss that we are dealing with? One thing is, first of all, to talk about your grief, to name it, and to understand what it is. It can be really helpful to figure out what it is and to name it so that it doesn't have to be this vague sense of worry or this really wordless suffering that you're going through. When we talk about naming it, that is not meant to be something that forces you to then just deal with it, confront it, and move on. On the contrary, it's really helpful to be mindful of not rushing yourself to feel better. It is okay if your journey right now doesn't look like somebody else's. You could have had 1 or 2 or even 3 good days in a row where whatever you are dealing with felt a little bit easier to manage, or you felt a little bit lighter, and you could wake up and all of a sudden feel terrible again. And it's so important to not only not compare your journey to somebody else's and feel like you need to be where somebody else is at just because that's where they're at, but also to not compare one day of your journey with a different day of your journey. Honor the fact that you had those good days and recognize that today you need to slow down. That's okay. Do that if that's what you need. Another thing that is helpful is to allow yourself to think about the things that you're grieving and to move forward by honoring them. What else can make me happy in that way? Maybe start a new tradition that can make me happy. I know a lot of people have been saying that they're realizing from this that, oh, I can actually connect to the friends I don't have time to see in person all the time quite easily online. Also, be mindful that there could be upcoming dates that might be tough for you. Again, if you've lost things that are being canceled in the future and it was something you were so looking forward to, it's being mindful of what that day that thing would have occurred on will mean to you and planning accordingly. Honor that loss and just focus on your needs in that moment. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of shame and guilt and a lot of people engaging in pain Olympics, trying to determine who's had it worse or if I'm allowed to feel how I feel when others have experienced objectively more loss or have had it worse. I think more often I am seeing it coming from just people within themselves, looking around, seeing what everyone else is going through, worrying about if they can talk about what they're experiencing, if that'll measure up, or if they will be upsetting somebody. Know that everyone's experiences of loss are valid, and it is okay to feel just as bad as somebody else who's in a different situation than you. You might feel frustrated and angry at somebody else if you are currently in the middle of your distress, or you are just recently managing an overwhelming emotion and someone else is talking about something and you're like, whoa, that is so much easier than what I'm going through. You're allowing that to somehow invalidate what you're going through, even if that person has no idea what you're going through and is not meaning to do that to you. Give yourself some distance, recognizing that you need a moment to kind of process what you're going through before you might be able to help somebody else. And that's okay again. One thing that's really important, I think, to remember during this is that you are allowed to feel both hopeful and realistic at the same time. In fact, I think there has to be a bit of a melding of those two right now, that hope and that realism, just because, again, so much is uncertain. There's been some talk of yes and versus yes but, which I love because that's something that I talk about all the time with my clients as is. Give equal weight to both parts of a statement by replacing but with and. So for example, that would look like, yes, I am grateful to have a lot more personal time with maybe the people who I live with, who I'm in quarantine with, or who I'm in self-isolation with. And sometimes I feel very overwhelmed by how much time I have to spend with them. Things aren't black and white. You're allowed to exist in shades of gray. You're allowed to feel like sometimes one thing is true and sometimes it is not. That takes a lot of pressure off of you to feel like you have to be totally okay or totally hopeless. Finally, taking care of yourself. There's a few different ways that taking care of yourself looks right now that are all very important. First of all, identifying your own strengths and your coping skills, looking at the situation and figuring out, how can I use what I already have innately to help me through this? And you might be thinking, well, I've never been in a situation like this, so I don't know what kind of skills and coping strategies that I have at my disposal. And in that case, I would encourage you to think of a time where you had to overcome something. Think about times when you didn't have the answer, or you didn't know when an answer would come, and how you dealt with that, and what personal strengths helped you get through that, and what coping skills you remember using, whether those are strategies you just used with yourself, or whether those were people you talked to or resources you used, anything that helped. Think about that situation and see how much you can apply it to now. Another thing that's really important is finding new ways to connect. Sometimes that could be online. Again, we're seeing a lot of people doing that. And sometimes it can just be over the phone. Or for some people, that connection piece is all those wonderful things that we've seen people doing where they are writing encouraging messages and putting them in their windows, or just drawing nice pictures and putting them in their windows. And of course, self-soothing. Using self-soothing when that's all you can use, and knowing that that's okay. Today, all I can do is take a shower, or not even, just like stay in my pajamas and have a lounge day where I'm like in my blankets. All I can do is make myself a cup of tea, and the cup of tea will not have the answers, but it will help me feel some comfort. And that's all I can do today, and that's okay. So I hope that no matter what experience of loss or grief you are going through right now, that you found something in this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.